I'm Ben Weingarten, and this is the Weingarten Report, the show where we bring you the most critical stories and most compelling arguments and analyses on the most vital issues of our time. The Weingarten Report is proudly brought to you by AMAC. In this week's episode, I'm going to explain the fatal flaw in quote-unquote anti-racism, which is one of, if not the central pillar in the wokeism that is taking over and destroying virtually every major institution in our country from within. You need look no further than videos like this for proof.
I am a woman of color. I am a mom. I am a cisgender millennial who's been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. I am intersectional, but my existence is not a box-checking exercise. I used to struggle with imposter syndrome, but at 36, I refuse to internalize misguided patriarchal ideas of what a woman can or should be.
That was a CIA promotional video. I kid you not. The organization that's supposed to exist to steal the secrets of our worst enemies and protect our own, which is celebrating and actively promoting wokeism in all of its parts, from identity politics to political correctness. This ideology has taken over everything from our national security and intelligence apparatus to our corporations and our schools. That is, all the most important elements of our society: government, private life, education. The core of the woke ideology is the elevation of equity over equality.
We face deep racial inequities in America and systemic racism that has plagued our nation for far, far too long.
When they say equity, they mean that people have to be represented in every aspect of society proportional to their group. Diversity of skills, abilities, and interests of all of us as individuals bring to the table be damned. So-called anti-racism is at the core of wokeism and the push for equity at its heart. To anti-racists, policy is judged as racist or not by whether it contributes to equity. People are judged as racist or not by whether they actively support anti-racist policy. So get with the woke program, in other words, or you're a bigot. That's a powerful message, but it's intellectually bankrupt, and the consequences of going along with it are catastrophic. See, anti-racists are completely fine with outright discrimination, violating our rights, treating us as unequal by law, and rigging opportunities, if it advances their supposedly noble cause of equity. This social engineering would kill liberty and justice, tear the fabric of society apart, and it goes without saying, leave us poorer and less safe. To avoid that fate, we should recognize a fatal flaw that proves this ideology is an intellectual fraud, and we should hammer this home every chance we get. Anti-racists prove to be racist on their own terms if their policies in practice actually contribute to inequity. And many such policies logically will and historically have. Anti-racists, for example, call for defunding, if not abolishing, the police. Over the last year, anti-cop rhetoric and policies in line with the woke anti-racists have cropped up in cities across the country. We don't know if it's coincidence, correlation, or causation, but there's been a historic rise in violent crime, led by murders, in cities throughout America. Who's been hurt the most? Well, of course, those living in the most crime-ridden areas, where it appears that in some cases, cops may have backed off given the hostility that they face. As a country, we've enjoyed several decades worth of falling violent crime. It comes against a backdrop of broken windows policing, cops walking the beat, not allowing minor infractions, and the like, police force increases, and efforts to lock up criminals and keep them off the streets. Now, as we move towards cities permitting public urination, vagrancy and squalor, efforts to hamstring police forces, some of which are seeing huge spikes in retirements, policies like no cash bail, where criminals commit crimes and are back on the streets within hours, it would only be logical to think crime rates are going to continue to rise. And the minorities in America's inner cities will bear the brunt of it, the most. Same thing with immigration. Some woke anti-racists call for policies up to and including abolishing ICE, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Now, open borders policies, including sanctuary city ones, of course contribute to illegal immigration. And illegal immigration, in turn, leads to crime and violence, often in the large minority population areas where illegal immigrants settle. But also, statistics show that open borders policies drive down wages for legal American low-skilled workers, including among them blacks and Hispanics. So illegal immigration contributes to more crime and less pay for minorities. Is this equity? Anti-racists also hate capitalism. Ibram X. Kendi, maybe the nation's most prominent anti-racist, says that, quote, to truly be anti-racist, you also have to be truly anti-capitalist, unquote. Now, setting aside that many of the world's socialist regimes have proven uniquely bigoted, and murderous for that matter, the truth is that capitalism tends to punish discrimination, rewarding people irrespective of their skin color based on what they bring to the table. Socialism generates massive inequity, a small class of ultra-rich elites, and then a mass of poor, hungry people. As the late great Walter Williams put it, quote, before the rise of capitalism, the way people amassed great wealth was by looting, plundering, and enslaving their fellow man. Might makes right, creating and perpetuating inequity. On the other hand, capitalism made it possible to become wealthy by serving one's fellow man. Maybe anti-racists want a return to looting, plundering, and enslaving if it's done by and to the right people. But in practice, that kind of regime usually again generates massive inequity and will likely collapse, and it would be terrible to boot. Lastly, think about schools. Teachers' unions are about as woke as it gets. Yet the likes of the anti-racist, so-called, American Federation of Teachers, AFT, run by Randy Weingarten, I promise no relation, supports policies that punish those living in the worst school districts, often in urban areas with large minority populations. AFT opposes school choice. It lobbied against opening public schools in spite of the science during the Chinese coronavirus pandemic, which continues, which of course hurt most struggling families trying to make ends meet in a terrible economy and take care of their kids too. AFT has influenced the CDC's guidelines, we recently found out. Who did this hurt most? Obviously those stuck in the worst school districts. And now the woke under the banner of equity, for example in California, are trying to dumb down and hyper-politicize mathematics. So unimpeachable science now is an area that must be hyper-politicized. If you wanted to stifle talented kids of all colors stuck in public schools while pushing the elites who can avoid this insanity to send their kids to private schools, what would you do differently? And that is the crux of the matter. All of these policies will grow the gap between our elites and everyone else, including minorities. Whether they realize it or not, supporting woke garbage helps cement our elite in positions of power. While the ruling class is most insulated from the consequences of these policies, already living in safe communities, benefiting from cheap illegal labor, able to shrug off the cost of socialism, and send their kids to Tony private schools, the people who are supposed to benefit from these policies most will suffer from them the most. Virtually every major inner city in America has been run by Democrats for decades, embracing the progressive agenda with nothing to show for it but a vicious generational cycle of poverty, violence, and social collapse shows the fraud of woke anti-racism. If anti-racists judge racism on the basis of unequal outcomes, their favored policies have proven systemically racist. And anti-racism is, on its own terms, racist as well. So when you hear the president talk about inequities and systemic racism, or you hear about, and he should look in the mirror, by the way, or you hear about the creation of new diversity, equity, and inclusion positions and departments, your ears should perk up. You have to recognize that this is a smokescreen. This is about masking a radical, racialist, progressive agenda in virtue, justice, and tolerance, so that if you oppose it, you can be cast as evil, racist, and bigoted. It takes advantage of many people who are well-intentioned, and it creates and exploits division. This is an intellectual fraud. It's a disaster for America, and most of all, it's a disaster for those the woke claim to care about the most. I'm Ben Weingarten. This has been the Weingarten Report. Be well, America.